to today's episode of the S.E. Shurn Podcast, Putting the Human in Business. This podcast is part of the S.E. Shurn chapter, the premier organization for HR and talent professionals in the Sioux Empire, Midwest, and beyond. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the S.E. Shurn Podcast. I am JR here with my co-host, Colleen. Colleen, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing today, JR?
I'm doing pretty well. It's been a good summer so far, and yeah, we still got some time left. So super excited for our guest today. With more than 25 years of HR experience, Maurine Ulmer has built a career focused on employee relations, employment law compliance, and helping organizations navigate complex workplace issues. She currently supports an organization of approximately 2,500 employees, very passionate about fostering fair, compliant, people-centered workplaces. So I have certainly had the privilege of working with Maurine and can validate and verify all of this. Just an incredible person. In addition to her role at Salmon's Financial Group, Maurine serves on an industry employee relations committee and is actively involved in the Sioux Falls community. Volunteer leadership includes 6 years as South Dakota Susan G. Komen Race for the Cure chairperson, and she was nominated for the Sioux Falls Women of Excellence Award in recognition of her community service. Outside of work, Maurine enjoys spending time with family, traveling and relaxing at her lake cabin in the summer and her winter home in Scottsdale, Arizona. So welcome, Maurine.
Thank you. Super happy to be here.
Yeah, great to see you. It's been a while. Really looking forward to the conversation today. And I can also attest that that intro probably still doesn't even do you justice with all the things you've done and do. You just never seem to stop. That's quite a privilege, I think, that we get to have you on here today and take some of your time. So with that, though, I think I'll turn it over to Colleen.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we like to start with an icebreaker. So, Maurine, you've dedicated a lot of time to supporting and advocating for women. Can you tell us one positive change you've seen in the workplace over the years that gives you hope for the future?
Yes, I love that question. Thanks, Colleen. I would say the biggest change I've seen in the workforce over the years would be the ability to speak up and have space in the room. I've seen a lot of changes in that. I've been in insurance industry, financial services for so many years. And there was a point in time where and it still is somewhat a very male-dominated industry. And now I've definitely seen more women in our industry and a comfort in speaking up and again, having space in a room.
Yeah, and I can attest to that too, myself obviously being a woman. I'm in a male-dominated trucking industry, and I am always pleasantly surprised that I have a voice. Like you've said, it's one of those professions where I did not see that possible, but it is, and I'm very happy about that.
Yeah, I can certainly speak to kind of the other side of it since I've transitioned into HR after moving back from the Twin Cities. Probably more males in the profession when I was with kind of consulting and management consulting of that. But definitely in the HR realm, yeah, seeing it from both ways, just love a balance, love hearing both perspectives. So one of the things I'd love to hear is really just from your HR perspective, Maurine. What are the most common workplace behaviors or performance changes that you see that might signal an employee is struggling with substance abuse?
Yes, of course. And, in HR, we see a lot. I always joke with younger students, high schoolers, college age students that if you are ever considering a career, don't look past HR because every single day is a different day. We're dealing with humans. Humans are messy, and every single day you're going to have a new adventure. When it comes to substance usage, behaviors and patterns, challenges, or changes that an organization or a leader may see, I always tell leadership, anytime you see a change in an employee, pause and reflect. Have they made a comment or communicated to you a life change or a struggle, some stressors, some loss? But anytime you see a change, pause and reflect. Is this new? Is this different? But specifically for substance usage, JR, in my experience, what I see is that's pretty common is generally smell. Alcohol, marijuana, those are the ones that generally have the most fragrance to them, if you will. Bloodshot eyes, dilated pupils, slurred speech, the really common ones. But in my experience, is just observations during just physical walking. I had an instance, several months ago where an individual was having a difficult time badging into one of our locations. I was notified, and my first concern was, is there a medical issue at play? shortly after we attended and triaged the situation, we realized that there wasn't necessarily a medical issue at play, but more of an intoxication, slow response, physical movement, slurred speech, just really anything unusual. And I always tell leaders and HR professionals, and I think HR professionals were a little bit more in tune with this, but trust your instincts. If you're seeing something that's off, lean into it, ask some curious questions, engage with the employee, and you're generally going to see more to either affirm or dismiss a concern.
I love how you have already started distinguishing whether it's substance abuse or maybe stress or burnout. It leads right into my next question here. So, you mentioned the medical issue. Some of us are not that keen on medical illnesses or what might signal that. But I've seen on the TikToks lately, there have been a lot of those cops pulling people over, thinking they're intoxicated. But then when it comes down to do a test or something, it's not alcohol at all. And it's a medical emergency. So what are some ways to potentially identify those challenges aside from the alcohol?
Yeah, it's such a challenge for us because oftentimes an individual with substance abuse or substance usage issues may actually mask that problem as a medical situation. Again, I've had employees who have notified their leader that I'm slow today or my speech is such and such because I'm trying new medications or my provider has issued me something new. Of course, that's putting us on notice. And we, as HR professionals, we know that we remind our leaders frequently, don't overlook those kind of notifications, but ensuring that as an employer, your HR benefits person, your leave person, your accommodation individual, whoever is leading that body of work is then contacted and speaking to the individual. Another thing with distinguishing these situations is that behaviors can be the same for stress and challenges in our outside life, our personal life. But those same situations can actually ignite and really influence the substance usage. So an individual saying, "Oh, I'm just stressed and I'm not sleeping well," that might be accurate, but they also may be using to cope with that. So as a leader, as an HR professional, you're not discounting that reason, but having to be able to recognize it. So when it comes down to substance usage, Colleen, I always tell my leaders, we really have to listen to what the employee is saying. And then also, you really do have to watch for those physical attributes, the bloodshot eyes, the slurred speech. We have a cameras on policy at our organization. So when we do have Teams meetings and whatnot, we do ask that employees have cameras on so that it helps us if there's an individual remote who's having a challenge and we need to be able to observe.
So I saw JR down there nodding and smiling. So I think we can all think of situations where we've had employees, like you said, Maureen, gives a heads up. Oh, I might be slow today, but I didn't sleep a lot. Or one thing that popped into my head, people calling in, right? Calling in, like, let's say on a Monday after a weekend, right? Or maybe a Friday before the weekend, or just those patterns of call-ins.
Yeah. And you know what else I've seen too? A lot of tardies, absenteeism is definitely a sign. Watching an individual, for leaders to keep an eye on lunch breaks and even the morning afternoon breaks. If you notice, if a leader or colleagues point out that there's a distinct change in the mood from when an employee leaves for lunch versus they come back from lunch. And I joke because I'm like, listen, I'm in a better mood when I come back from lunch too. I think most of us like need a break every once in a while. But there's been instances that we've had to manage through in our organization where it's a significant mood swing. And again, I think that that's what we want to look for when we're supporting our organization or supporting leadership is what's common versus what's significant and patterns, really watching for patterns. Because most of the time when we have an employee who's struggling with substance usage or substance abuse, it's not going to be just an isolated incident. It's likely you're going to see a couple different things pop up before you're like, okay, we have a pattern here we need to really lean in on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, speaking of patterns, I've always wondered why, people tend to get sick on Fridays so much or Mondays. Like somebody should really study that, I think, and determine, correct me if I'm wrong too, isn't the day after the Super Bowl the most absent day in the workplace, like statistically?
I think
Have
you're
you read
right.
that? Either?
Yeah.
I think it is the number one call-in day, and just funny how that works. It just, maybe that time of year, that weather, who knows?
I think every person I've ever spoken to said, "Why do we have the Super Bowl so late? We should push it up. It's a Sunday. It's one game on a Sunday."
Right.
So,
Yeah, yeah, and it starts at like 5:30
yeah,
and
employers
goes by
unite.
like
Paid
yeah, that
holiday.
would definitely be yeah, certainly a good push. In my mind, the reason if you see me smirking on camera, I'm just throughout my career too, just thinking of the different stories and things that Maureen, I'm sure you're
Yeah.
just probably tired of them because there's been so many, but I just think of how many times we've talked about you could write a book. I mean,
Yep,
and probably sell it pretty well of all just
Yep.
the HR stories.
this
Make
is
it all
true.
anonymous. I've even heard some colleagues over the years that worked in construction industries
Yeah.
and see construction workers and don't think much of it. But yeah, I've heard plenty of stories where over lunch, they'll take down like a 6-pack. And I'm like
Yeah.
just blown away at
Mhm.
hearing like how how normalized, I don't know if that's the
Right.
right word, but how just normal it's become on some of that. Maybe that, and this is years ago, but yeah, I'm guessing you could probably touch on that a little bit, Maureen. One thing I do want to transition to is, of course, we're not getting off this podcast without talking about cannabis, legal
Mhm.
marijuana. That's definitely been a big change and sort of shift in movement in the past few years with our country. But would love to hear your take and maybe even start with the current state of it and what current laws are. We've had some things kind of push and whatnot, but even beyond that, like how many states have legalized medical marijuana versus recreational and how it plays into work, not only for South Dakota, but we have remote workers too. And wherever you want to take that, I know that's a big
Yeah.
umbrella, but
It is huge, Jared. And my organization, we have employees sitting on average in 43 states. So you're absolutely right. It's something that I think a lot of companies deal with and have to be conscientious about on both sides of the coin. On the one side, protecting your work environment, your clients, your customers, your proprietary information, just an individual under the influence is just not of the right mindset to be doing work. On the flip side, we have to also be careful with state laws that do legalize cannabis and in drug testing and whatnot. I know some management style is as soon as there's an individual who may appear to be under the influence. And maybe it's a company policy to mandate a test right away. However, as we know, cannabis can remain in the bloodstream and whatnot for quite some time. So taking an adverse action in a state that has legalized marijuana can be really challenging. To your question, I don't know if this statistic is accurate today, but I know at one point in time there were approximately 40 some out of the 50 states that had at least legalized medical marijuana usage. And we know that the recreational is picking up quite a bit. And then you have, even if the state that your employee is sitting in isn't legalized recreation, they may have spent their weekend in another state that is legalized recreation. So it makes that landscape incredibly challenging for employers to navigate. One of the things, once the legalized and even both recreational and medical started to become more common, we updated our substance abuse policy to substance usage policy. Made a distinct change in the name. Abuse tends to lean, that the person has an issue or a problem, where what we are trying to ensure our policy was addressing is substance usage and being under the influence during work hours. If individual companies still have policies that say, here's our substance abuse policy, it might be a good idea to change that to substance usage to ensure that you're covering all aspects of, basically what we're trying to say here is that we want you to be in a good state of mind to complete your job and your duties required. Another thing that I always really look at too is within that policy, communicate the option for treatment, the option for what benefits may be available. It lends a nice caring aspect to it without it, creating a stigmatism around marijuana usage, alcohol usage, whatnot.
I'm glad you touched on that with the kind of the usage. My mind has always gone to, and this really hasn't been my area of HR, and so maybe these are some elementary questions, but if people get off work or Friday night, they have a beer. So if marijuana is legal, people get off work, they smoke marijuana or Friday night or on the weekend. And yeah, I've always been curious, like how that's then tested for. I've understood like testing does last longer that way. And so alcohol, I think a lot of people know breathalyzers, but I've always been curious too as to how you can like immediately test for marijuana being currently under the influence like you would with alcohol. Because, okay, so if you had smoked marijuana on Friday night, but it's in your system Monday, is there any way for that more immediate test like a breathalyzer?
I'm not an expert in that either, JR, but I will say from what I know about marijuana testing is depending on the type of test, which is, I believe the blood test is the best way to test a hair follicle, whatnot, that's going to carry it much longer. Blood test, you can measure levels, and the testing has become more refined in the way that the higher the levels of the THC and whatnot, the more frequent the usage was. Again, that's my understanding of it. I think it depends on the organization or the industry in which you're going to be testing is really important too. So for us, we're financial services. We're generally not going to mandate a drug test or even an alcohol test because we're not operating heavy machinery. Using your example of construction workers, we don't have workers that are driving. We're more apt to remove an individual from their duties for the day, relieve them from their duties for the day, and then have a conversation with them. That being said, companies that are, I know, Colleen, maybe even your industry, companies that have individuals who are behind a wheel or who are working on a manufacturing plant or in the medical field, any of those that have a really direct threat to themselves or individuals or their work product, that may warrant an immediate test and might, of course, have a little bit more immediate action as a result.
Yeah, I was going to actually say, I really feel for the companies that are non-DOT because it seems like there's a lot that goes into, oh my gosh, just the cannabis, the levels of how often do you use it. I'm assuming the higher the level, probably the more significant the use is. But yeah, we're zero tolerance for drugs and alcohol because we have people operating forklifts. We have people driving, a enormous truck down the road. So yeah, definitely in those fields, like you said, construction, trucking, I think it's more cut and dry, but it can get kind of hairy, I think, with other maybe how do I put that? Less risk, right? The jobs that have less risk as far as, somebody getting hurt on the job.
You're absolutely right. One thing I would point out, Colleen, too, if the entities and the industries you just pointed out are really really important and risky in the moment. And you have OSHA laws, you have different kinds of laws, work comp, whatnot that you have to navigate. There's a higher risk with that.
Right.
Within the banking and financial industries, one of the things we have tightened up in our policies over the years is work sponsored, but off work hours type activity. Because all of us, I would imagine, HR professionals, we've seen the court cases, we've seen the headline making cases where, oh, it was a holiday party and it was sponsored by the organization. They had an open bar and one employee gave a whole crew of people a ride and then got in a horrible accident. There's a liability factor there, which is, I understand most organizations have moved to, like a 2-drink ticket type event. I think we need to open our minds to the fact that this isn't just a 8 to 5 or 7 to 4 type issue. Like we really need to watch liability for after hours or after regular business hour events as well.
Right.
Yeah, one thing I was always, thinking years ago, when Colorado probably first passed it, it's like, I wonder if this is going to be like minimum wage, where you look at national versus state level and you do what benefits the employee the most. And I'm thinking, probably not. Like, well,
Yeah.
my state allows it, so can't I smoke here or do what I want here? But yeah.
So, all right, obviously we are on the path to identifying if someone has been using or if they're at risk. When a manager has a reasonable suspicion, what is the appropriate way, or is there a legally safe way that protects both you and the employee of how you address it?
Yes. So a couple things on that. I always say to our leaders and my HR team is First of all, we don't know what the employee may be using. We don't know the state of mind. If the employee is confronted, how they may react. So before we even confront the employee, I'm always coaching our leadership and HR team to approach with empathy, care, compassion. Come at that conversation from a place of concern. And again, kind of a slow and caring reach out. I've noticed that you don't seem yourself today. Can you just hop on a call or come into a meeting room and let's just talk? The last thing I want any of our employees or leaders to experience is somebody who has, maybe a rage outburst or something because they're confronted and they're scared that, oh gosh, I might lose my job. So that's the first thing that I always coach on is let's get them to an area where we show care, concern, empathy, and approach from a really quiet, calm perspective. And that can be hard for our leaders because as you mentioned earlier, if it's an individual who has attendance issues or performance issues, oftentimes our leaders are just done. They're just fed up. And so managing the leader emotions can be just as challenging as managing the situation.
Yeah.
Another thing, when you said legally safe, that brings to mind, Colleen, is if you have an individual who is on site or JR, again, like how you use the construction setting, if they're anywhere but home and you need to remove them from their duties, always, always, always remind your leaders to call an Uber or to get a ride for the individual. Putting an employee in a car after we suspect or have a reasonable suspicion that they might be under influence creates huge liability for the organization. I tell my leaders, call an Uber, put it on your company credit card, or retain your receipt for reimbursement. That's our documentation to show that we made a good faith effort to get them home safely. If the employee refuses and they get behind the wheel of their car and drive, we've shielded ourselves the best we could from liability for that. That being said, I also have had instances where an Uber isn't even going to be sufficient. We've had to, call first responders and an ambulance for an individual who was really, really under the influence of alcohol, where I was like, I can't even in good faith put them in an Uber. So
Right.
those are you always have to measure it by the level of intensity, but ensuring that they get home safe and relieve them of the duties, and don't talk to them about it in the moment. We want to get them to a safe place. I always say, go home. We're relieving you of your duties for today. I will call you tomorrow and we'll touch base. Let them know just today, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to have a conversation. We're just going to get you home into a safe place.
I think too, a lot of people would be surprised that it's not always common sense for your management or leadership people to take the step of doing an Uber or giving someone a ride home. I worked at a place where someone was put out of service and they said, well, we sent them home. I said, okay, what do you mean you sent them home? Well, they couldn't work because they were drunk. So I just sent them home. I'm like, in their car? No. And I remember thinking they were lucky that he made it home, but
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm.
I could definitely see a lot of managers wanting to like, okay, well, remove this person from the property, from the work environment, not really using the heart. They're using more the head, oddly enough, in that
Mhm.
type of situation where it's like, okay, just think compassionately. And I think this leads us really well into our final question before we do some closing rapid fire pieces. If you recall, my background's organizational psychology. It used to be clinical psychology and behavioral health before that. And I still love the field very much. And I'm really curious to hear your take on some of those more modern cutting edge practices of to how not just be proactive, but better treatment. One of the things I always think of is I believe like in Europe, and this is more of like in the prison system, which is obviously a little different than the substance abuse, but how the prison system in the US is different than in the UK and the rehabilitation process or route that they take. And I would love to hear your take and what you know of the most cutting edge effective practices today that you think are have shown to be most effective with employers, and where you see kind of that little pivot or shift
Mhm.
with employers.
Yeah, it's a challenge because there's certain aspects of the topic of substance usage and substance issues that you want to be, again, human resources and compassion, empathetic for. And like I said earlier on, humans are messy. We are humans. We all have issues. We always like to say, leave it at the door. That's not reality. Nobody leaves it at the door. So there's this part where you really try to be caring and empathetic. But then there's also a huge liability. And in this litigious world, there's such a ripe environment for lawsuits and issues for the company, for the employer. I always like to look at it through a couple lenses. First of all, what's your organizational risk appetite? Can your business, can your organization have a second chance or first warning type environment? If you can, and that's something that you're okay with, and that risk is something that you have the appetite for, that's great. The challenge, of course, is we have those laws. We have OSHA, we have workers' comp, we have a liability type issue with making decisions. Again, like you said, Colleen, you had a leader who put somebody in the car because they were under the influence. I mean, all of that stuff does weigh heavily on an organization. So where I think most companies land, JR, is, I mentioned this earlier on, in your policy, I like to always put, first of all, in a policy, it's like the why behind it. We're a financial services organization. We're not operating forklifts or heavy machinery, but we are dealing with people's finances and
Yeah.
their money. And so if you're under the influence and you move a decimal point, that can literally cost you money. So
Yep.
that's why for us, it's incredibly important that our employees are of sound state of mind. If it's a different type of industry where let's just say maybe a restaurant or something where, alcohol is served on a regular basis. If somebody's under the influence, you can maybe give them a warning saying, hey, I get we're in the restaurant industry. I get that we might have a cocktail. We're not going to do that going forward. You have a little bit more flexibility there. So first and foremost, understanding your risk appetite as a company. And then within that policy, weave in those empathetic pieces. We have in our policy, if you come to us first before we have to come to you and say, hey, I'm struggling with an addiction, I'm struggling with a substance usage issue, I need time off. We'll work with you on leave of absence. We'll work with you on accommodating so that you can attend meetings. We'll work on a flexible schedule with you. So weaving in those opportunities is probably the best balance between that risk mitigation and letting employees know, come talk to us. We'll work with you. We'd rather you do that than be in a position of either jeopardizing yourself, your own safety, somebody else's safety, or putting our company at risk for underperformance in some fashion.
Yeah, I am pleasantly surprised that we also have a policy like that. So EAP is actually really great here. So
Mhm.
yeah, just having that in the transportation industry is pretty impressive, I think.
It makes sense that it's it's very company specific. It actually reminds me of somebody that told me this was actually a good company, smaller company, probably had, I don't know, 100 employees, maybe more, but they eventually had to create a no gun policy. And not because it was problematic, but just more legally kind of getting into that. But it was just a very pro-gun, pro-friendly type of environment that, it wouldn't be common that, oh, it's kind of sitting wrong in my holster or whatever, that they would put their gun on the table during a conference meeting. And
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe if you work at Smith and Wesson or something, that maybe that would be the norm. But that was just incredibly interesting because of
That is.
obviously being too much in the HR world, we hear the opposite end of that spectrum.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of almost like having show and tell with like, hey, check out my gun. And then it accidentally goes off, right?
Right?
Could
Oh
be a bad day.
gosh.
Why they went that way. It's like, it's not if, but when. I mean, do you
Right.
really want to suscept yourself to that? It's like, well, it kind of depends on, I suppose, ownership and leadership.
Mhm.
That if you got a private company, that's maybe your decision to make.
We're the state. And that's another thing, even on this topic, the state laws fluctuate. I just read an article that Florida is actually now shifting their perspective on holding employees accountable for off work usage. So I haven't dug into that case yet. It's brand new. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but monitoring these state laws and where your employees are sitting is really important on how you address whether it's guns or substance usage or what have you.
For sure.
All right, we're going to wrap up here, and we like to do rapid fire questions, kind of like a little this or that. Don't overthink it. Just say the first thing that comes to mind. All right. So, Maurine, Summer Olympics or Winter Olympics?
Gosh, that one's tough.
You're like ice skating or gymnastics?
I love Olympics, so I'll say Winter Olympics.
Okay. All right. Fireworks or Christmas lights?
Christmas lights.
Okay. Mosquitoes or shoveling snow?
I'm gonna go mosquito.
Oh, really? Okay. All right.
I hate to say it, but yes.
Well, we do have those snow seasons where sometimes we get dumped on in late April and it's super heavy and awful. So I get it.
Right.
Yeah. Ice cream or hot chocolate?
Ice cream.
Ice cream. Okay. And if you could only keep one season forever, summer or winter?
Oh gosh, I was really hoping you'd say fall. Um, let's see. I'll say summer. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll say
All right.
summer.
I had a feeling you'd say summer simply because you talked about going to Arizona in the winter. So,
Yep. Yep. Hence the mosquito answer. Hence,
right.
hence the mosquito answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was really thinking I was going to go 5 for 5 on that, guessing what your responses would be, Maureen, having worked with you for I think nearly 6 years, but went 4 for 5. I figured the hot chocolate over the ice cream. That was the
It
only one I
depends if it's spiked hot chocolate, JR. Since we're talking about substance usage, if it's spiked hot chocolate.
Well, thank you again for coming on the podcast, Maureen. And to everyone listening, do you have a website or do you like a LinkedIn? I forgot to ask you before we started.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to connect with anybody on LinkedIn. It's my full name out there, which is Maurine McManus-Ulmer, but you can search me out and I'm sure you can find me.
All right. Awesome. So everyone connect with her on LinkedIn. And again, thank you, listeners. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share with your friends. And in the meantime, keep it professional.
but keep it real. Thanks, everyone.